The divorce papers landed on the marble island with a sound like a guillotine's final, soft drop. Claire's hand, which had been rubbing a soothing circle over the tight drum of her stomach, froze. 8 months. They were 8 months into a pregnancy she thought they'd both wanted. Ethan wouldn't look at her. He just stared at the sweeping panorama of the San Francisco skyline from their penthouse window, his reflection a cold, distant silhouette in the glass. "It's a clean break, Claire," he said, his voice stripped of all warmth, the same voice he used to close a hostile takeover. "The settlement is generous. You and the baby will be well taken care of." The word baby was an island, detached and foreign in his mouth. He was severing not just their marriage but his fatherhood, right before it even began. The shock was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. This wasn't a fight. It was an execution. The silence that followed his declaration was more violent than any scream. It stretched across the cavernous, minimalist living room, a space Claire had once tried to warm with books and throw blankets, only to find them tidied away by the housekeeper Ethan insisted upon. Now the room felt like a mausoleum, all sharp angles and cold surfaces, a perfect reflection of the man she had married. "Generous?" The word scraped its way out of her throat, raw and disbelieving. Her gaze dropped from his rigid back to the sheaf of papers. A settlement, as if this were a business deal gone sour, a partnership to be dissolved with a tidy sum. "Ethan, I'm carrying your child, our daughter. What are you talking about?" He finally turned, and the man she saw was a stranger. The warm, crinkling eyes that had charmed her, the easy smile that had once seemed so genuine, they were gone. In their place was the stony, implacable mask of Ethan Drake, CEO of Drake Industries, son of the formidable Arthur Drake. It was his boardroom face, a face that had liquidated companies and shattered careers without a flicker of emotion. She just never imagined it would be turned on her. "The decision is final," he stated, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. He walked over to the wet bar and poured himself a whiskey, the amber liquid sloshing against the crystal glass. He didn't offer her one. Of course not. She was pregnant. But why? The question was a desperate plea for a logic that wasn't there. "Last week we were picking out a name. You held my hand at the ultrasound and you cried. You told me you'd never seen anything so perfect." A muscle twitched in his jaw, the only sign that her words had registered. "Things change, Claire. People change." "People don't change like this overnight." Her voice rose, cracking with the agony of his betrayal. This is monstrous. Did I do something? Is there someone else?" The last question was a whisper, a fear she hadn't dared to voice until now. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, his eyes cold and dismissive over the rim of the glass. "This isn't about another woman. This is about my future. Our futures. They're no longer compatible." The calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. He was erasing her, erasing their child, from his grand life plan. She saw it all then, the subtle shifts she had ignored, the late nights he'd claimed were work, the increasing frequency of his business trips, the private phone calls with his father that always left him tense and guarded. She had attributed it to the pressure of his upcoming merger, the biggest deal of his career. She'd tried to be the supportive wife, the calm center in his storm, giving up her own ambitions to create a stable home for him. She had abandoned her own tech startup, a project that was once her entire world, because he'd said he needed her full support. He'd called her dream a hobby compared to the empire he was building, and she, blinded by love, had believed him. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours," he continued, placing the glass down with a clinical click. "I've arranged for your things to be moved to a condo in Pacific Heights. It's fully furnished. You'll have everything you need." He was evicting her from their home, their life, his heart. The baby gave a sudden, sharp kick, a little life reminding her she was not alone in this wreckage. The sensation, usually a source of joy, was now a painful throb of reality. She placed a protective hand on her belly, her anchor in the churning sea of his betrayal. "I don't want your condo, Ethan. I don't want your generous settlement." Her voice was quiet now, but it held a new steely resolve forged in the fire of her heartbreak. I want you to look at me. I want you to look at me and tell me honestly why you are doing this to your family. He flinched. For a fleeting second, a crack appeared in the mask, a flicker of the man she loved, conflicted, pained, even ashamed. But then it was gone, sealed over by a chilling resolve. It was his father's resolve. She could see Arthur Drake's influence all over this. The old patriarch's ruthless pragmatism poisoning his son. I can't, Ethan whispered, the admission costing him more than he would ever let on. He couldn't look at her, at the swell of her belly, and hold his ground. He turned back to the window, his fortress of glass and steel. The driver is waiting for you downstairs. Please, Claire, don't make this harder than it has to be. It was the final devastating blow. He wasn't just ending their marriage. He was outsourcing the dirty work. She wouldn't be allowed the dignity of packing her own life, of choosing her memories. She was being removed, like a piece of furniture that no longer fit the decor. Numbly, she walked toward the door, her movements stiff and robotic. She didn't take her purse, her keys, or the framed photo of their wedding day that sat on the console table. She took nothing from this life he was so eager to erase. At the door, she paused, her hand on the cold metal handle, and looked back at him one last time. You'll regret this, Ethan, she said, the words not a threat, but a prophecy. One day you'll realize what you've thrown away, and by then it will be too late. He didn't answer. He just stood there, a king in his glass castle, watching his world become smaller, lonelier, and infinitely more desolate. And Claire walked out, not to the condo he had arranged, but toward the only real home she had left. The taxi ride from the opulent heights of Nob Hill to the modest tree-lined streets of Palo Alto felt like a journey through time. Claire stared unseeing at the blur of city lights, each one a painful reminder of the life she'd been so brutally ejected from. She didn't go to the sterile, pre-packaged condo Ethan had chosen for her. Instead, she directed the driver to a small, unassuming apartment complex, a place that held the ghost of a different life, a different her. Benjamin Ben Carter opened the door on the second knock, his face a mixture of confusion and concern that quickly morphed into alarm. He was wearing a faded MIT sweatshirt and flannel pajama pants, his dark hair a mess from sleep. Claire? What's wrong? It's almost midnight. His eyes traveled down to her swollen belly, then back to her tear-streaked face. Without another word, he pulled her into a hug, his arms a circle of familiar, unconditional warmth. She collapsed against him, the sobs she had suppressed in Ethan's cold presence finally breaking free. They were ragged, ugly sounds of a heart being torn apart. Ben just held her, murmuring soothing nonsense, his hand rubbing her back until the storm of tears subsided into shuddering breaths. He guided her inside, his apartment a stark contrast to the penthouse. It was cluttered but cozy, filled with stacks of books on programming, half-finished circuit boards, and the lingering smell of coffee and takeout pizza. It was the scent of her past. Ben had been her co-founder, her coding partner, her best friend. They had started a small company, Ether, right out of grad school, fueled by ramen noodles and a shared dream of revolutionizing logistics with a predictive AI platform. Then Ethan had entered her life, a whirlwind of wealth, charm, and grand promises. He dismissed Ether as a cute little project and convinced her that her genius would be better served supporting his. Ben had been the only one to voice his doubts. That guy doesn't see you, Claire, he'd warned her gently. He sees a beautiful, smart accessory. She hadn't listened. Now sitting on Ben's worn-out sofa, a mug of chamomile tea warming her cold hands, she felt the full weight of her foolishness. He divorced me, she said, the words still sounding alien. He just handed me papers, said our futures weren't compatible. Ben's face hardened. That son of a bitch, after everything you gave up for him. He didn't say I told you so. He didn't need to. The regret was a living thing inside her. He's having my things moved to a condo, like I'm a piece of old hardware being decommissioned. You're not going there, Ben said, his voice firm. You're staying here. The spare room is still set up exactly as you left it. The spare room. They had called it the bunker. It had been their office, the nerve center of Ether. After she left to marry Ethan, Ben had kept the project alive, tinkering with it in his spare time, refusing to let their dream die completely. He'd sent her occasional updates, which she'd glanced at with a pang of guilt before filing them away, too consumed by her new life as Mrs. Drake. He led her to the room. The whiteboard was still covered in her elegant, looping handwriting, complex algorithms and flowcharts she'd sketched out years ago. Her old laptop sat on the desk, a layer of dust covering its surface. It felt like a time capsule from a life she had betrayed. Ben, I can't impose. I'm a mess. And with the baby... Stop. He put his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to meet his steady gaze. This is not an imposition. This is home. And that baby, he said, his eyes softening as he looked at her belly, is already family. We'll figure this out. Together. The simple, profound loyalty in his words was a balm to her shattered spirit. This was real. This messy, cluttered apartment. This unwavering friendship. This was the foundation she should have built her life on. Sleep didn't come easy. She lay in her old bed, the familiar hum of the server rack in the corner, a strange lullaby. For years, that sound had been the soundtrack to her ambition, her creativity, her purpose. She had traded it for the sterile silence of a penthouse, for a man who saw her as an asset to be managed and eventually discarded. Her hand drifted to her stomach, where her daughter was restlessly turning. A fierce, protective love surged through her, eclipsing the pain for a moment. This wasn't just about her anymore. She had to build a world for this child, a world of safety and stability, a world where her mother wasn't a victim. In the faint glow of the monitor, she saw the login screen of her old laptop. On impulse, she got up and sat at the desk. Her fingers found the keys, the muscle memory still there. She typed in her password, Ether V1, and the screen flickered to life. There it was, the code she had written, the architecture she had designed. It was elegant, powerful, and unfinished. Ben had made some improvements, but the core of it was still hers. It was a logistics platform that didn't just track shipments, it anticipated them. It used predictive AI to analyze weather patterns, social trends, traffic data, and 1,000 other variables to reroute and optimize supply chains in real time. It was years ahead of its time. It was brilliant, and she had walked away from it. A new feeling began to stir beneath the grief. A flicker of anger, yes, but also something else. A spark. The embers of the woman she used to be, the innovator, the builder, were beginning to glow. Ethan had tried to extinguish her light, to reduce her to a dependent. He had underestimated her. They all had. She opened a new file, her fingers flying across the keyboard, the code flowing from her as easily as breath. She didn't know what the future held. She was 8 months pregnant, soon to be divorced, and homeless, but for the grace of a friend. But in the quiet solitude of the bunker, surrounded by the ghosts of her abandoned dreams, Claire Bennett began to rebuild. Not just her code, but herself. The next few days passed in a blur of legal consultations and emotional exhaustion. Claire's lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, was appalled by the callousness of the divorce filing. "This is a strategic move, Claire," Sarah explained, her brow furrowed as she scanned the documents. "The timing, the lack of mediation. This is designed to be a swift, brutal amputation. They don't want to fight, they want to surrender." The "they" was telling. This wasn't just Ethan, it was the Drake Empire, a corporate machine that crushed anything in its path. The settlement offered was indeed generous by normal standards, a golden cage designed to ensure her silence and swift compliance. Refusing it felt like standing in front of a freight train. Between calls with Sarah, Claire existed in a strange limbo in Ben's apartment. He was a quiet, steady presence, making sure she ate, letting her sleep, and never pushing her to talk. He just sat in the living room, coding on his own projects, a silent sentinel guarding her fragile peace. Most of her time, however, was spent in the bunker. Working on Ether was the only thing that made sense. It was a problem she could solve, a world she could control. The logic of the code was a soothing balm to the chaotic irrationality of her life. She poured all her pain, her anger, and her fear into the algorithms, refining them, strengthening them, making them more powerful than she had ever imagined. It was a distraction, yes, but it was also a reclamation. She was taking back the part of herself she had given away. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Claire was deep in a complex piece of code, her brow furrowed in concentration, a half-empty tub of ice cream by her side, when her phone buzzed with an unknown international number. She ignored it. It buzzed again. Annoyed, she answered, ready to snap at a telemarketer. "Is this Ms. Claire Bennett?" The voice was male, with a slight, precise Japanese accent. "Who is this?" she asked, her tone flat. "My name is Kaido Tanaka. I am a managing partner at Hiroshi Capital in Tokyo." The name meant nothing to her. "I'm not looking for investors," she said, ready to hang up. "Forgive my forwardness, Miss Bennett, but we are not looking to invest. We have been trying to reach you for some time. We were tracking the early progress of your project, Ether, some years ago. We believe the platform's core concept is revolutionary." Claire's heart skipped a beat. Ether? How could a VC firm in Tokyo possibly know about a dormant project from a defunct two-person startup? "That project, it's been inactive for years," she said cautiously. "We are aware," Mr. Tanaka replied, his voice calm and steady. "We also believe that in the current global market, with supply chain disruptions becoming the new norm, its value has not diminished. In fact, it has grown exponentially. Your predictive analytics engine is, to our knowledge, unparalleled." She sank into her chair, her hand instinctively going to her belly. This was impossible. It had to be a prank or a scam. "How did you find me?" "We are very thorough." "It was not easy. Your professional life seemed to vanish." "We are aware of your marriage to Mr. Drake." There was a delicate pause. "Our sources indicate that your circumstances have recently changed. We hope we are not intruding at a difficult time." The man was a ghost. He knew about Ether. He knew about Ethan. He knew about the divorce. The level of research was both terrifying and flattering. "What do you want, Mr. Tanaka?" "We want to know if the intellectual property for Ether is available for acquisition. Hiroshi Capital is prepared to make a very significant offer to purchase it outright and fund its development into a global platform. With you, of course, leading the project." Claire's mind reeled. Acquisition, a significant offer. Her leading the project. It was the dream she had abandoned, showing up on her doorstep at the lowest moment of her life. The irony was so thick she could barely breathe. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "The project isn't ready. It's not even a functioning prototype." "We are not investing in a prototype, Ms. Bennett," Mr. Tanaka said, his voice imbued with a quiet confidence that cut through her doubt. "We are investing in the architecture. We are investing in the architect. We have seen your early papers, your design documents. We are investing in you." For years, her value had been defined by her proximity to Ethan Drake. She was the beautiful, intelligent wife of a powerful man. Her own brilliance had been a footnote. To hear her work, her mind, praised with such conviction by a total stranger was deeply, profoundly unsettling. It cracked open a part of her she thought had died. "I need to think about this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Of course, but please understand, the market will not wait. Others are trying to solve this problem, but they are patching old systems. You have designed something new from the ground up. We would like to schedule a video conference with you and our partners, as soon as you are able, to discuss the preliminary details and present our offer." He named a time for the following afternoon. Numbly, she agreed. After they hung up, she stared at her phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. She walked into the living room, where Ben was working. "You're not going to believe this," she said, her voice shaking. She told him everything. He listened, his eyes widening with each detail. When she finished, he didn't cheer or celebrate. He just looked at her with an expression of such profound, unwavering belief that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Of course they found you," he said softly, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Genius doesn't stay hidden forever, Claire, not even when it tries to hide from itself." That night there was no sleep. There was only work. Fueled by adrenaline and a terrifying, unfamiliar hope, Claire and Ben pulled an all-nighter. They weren't just preparing for a meeting, they were resurrecting a dream. In the warm, cluttered chaos of the bunker, surrounded by the ghosts of their past. Claire Bennett was about to build her future. The reflection in the laptop's dark screen was a woman Claire barely recognized. Her face was pale and puffy from lack of sleep, dark circles blooming under her eyes. She was wearing one of Ben's oversized black t-shirts, the only thing that comfortably fit over her burgeoning stomach. She looked less like a tech visionary and more like a refugee. "You ready for this?" Ben asked, placing a fresh cup of coffee on the desk beside her. "No," she said honestly. "I feel like a fraud. I'm going to sit here, looking like a beached whale, and talk to a bunch of Japanese billionaires about a project I abandoned 5 years ago." "You're not a fraud," Ben countered, his voice firm. "You're the smartest person I know. Just walk them through the architecture. Let the work speak for itself. And for the record," he added with a small smile, "you don't look like a beached whale. You look like a creator of, life and revolutionary AI platforms." His simple faith was her armor. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and clicked, "Join meeting." A grid of faces appeared on the screen. There were 6 of them, all men, all in sharp, dark suits. They sat around a long, polished table in a room that screamed money and power. In the center was Kaito Tanaka, who gave her a slight, respectful bow of his head. "Ms. Bennett, thank you for making the time. We are honored." Claire's heart pounded. She felt a sudden, absurd urge to apologize for her appearance, for the cluttered bunker visible behind her. But then she remembered Sarah's advice. Don't apologize. Don't explain. Own your space. "Mr. Tanaka," she said, her voice steadier than she expected, "the honor is mine. Shall we begin?" For the next hour, she was no longer a heartbroken, abandoned wife. She was the architect of Ether. She moved with a confidence she didn't know she still possessed, pulling up diagrams, walking them through the multi-layered AI, explaining the predictive modeling that made her platform so unique. She spoke not of profits or market share, but of elegance, efficiency, and the beauty of a perfectly designed system. The partners listened intently, their faces impassive. They peppered her with sharp, insightful questions about scalability, data security, latency, and the ethics of predictive AI. They were testing her, pushing her, trying to find the flaws in her design and her resolve. With each question, she grew more confident. This was her language, her world. Ben sat just off camera, occasionally sliding a note in front of her or pulling up a supporting file, a silent co-pilot in the most important flight of her life. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the virtual room. Claire's stomach tightened. Had she failed? Was it all a delusion? Then an older gentleman who hadn't spoken yet, whom Tanaka had introduced as the chairman, leaned forward. "Ms. Bennett," he said, his voice deep and resonant, "you have not built a company, you have composed a symphony." Relief washed over her, so potent it almost made her dizzy. Kaito Tanaka smiled. "We are in agreement. We believe Ether has the potential to become the global standard for modern logistics. We would like to make a preliminary offer to acquire the intellectual property and all related assets." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "We are prepared to offer $2 billion. The number hung in the air, unreal and impossible. $2 billion. Claire heard a small, choked sound and realized it had come from Ben. Her own lungs had ceased to function. She must have misheard. I'm sorry," she stammered. "Could you repeat that?" $2 billion, Tanaka confirmed, his expression serene. "Along with a 5-year contract for you as CEO of the new subsidiary, a significant equity stake, and a development budget that will allow you to build the team and infrastructure you require." This wasn't just an offer. It was a coronation. They weren't just buying her code, they were betting their fortunes on her vision. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan Drake was in a tense lunch meeting with his father. He'd seen the missed call from an old mutual friend of his, and Claire's, but had ignored it. His phone buzzed again with a text. "Dude, you will not believe what Claire is up to. Call me." Impatiently, Ethan glanced at it and scoffed. What could she possibly be up to? Filing a messy lawsuit? Calling his mother? He dismissed it. "The board for the merger is getting nervous, Ethan," Arthur Drake said, his voice a low growl. This divorce, it's a distraction. They see it as a sign of instability. You need to finalize it, quietly and quickly. It's being handled, Father, Ethan said a bit too defensively. Claire won't be a problem. She's emotional, but she's not stupid. She'll take the settlement and disappear. He projected an air of cool control, but inside he was rattled. The decision to divorce Claire had been his father's idea, a cold, strategic move to present Ethan as unencumbered and focused to the conservative board of the company they were merging with. A pregnant wife is a liability in a deal this size, Arthur had decreed. It signals divided priorities. In a moment of weakness and ambition, Ethan had agreed. He'd told himself it was just business, but the image of Claire's shattered face haunted him. He pushed it away, focusing on the prize, the merger that would make him one of the most powerful men in the country. Claire and her little project were part of his past, a past he was methodically erasing. He had no idea that her past was about to collide with his future with the force of a supernova. Back in the bunker, Claire finally found her voice. Mr. Tanaka, she said, her mind still reeling from the number. Your offer is beyond anything I could have imagined. I accept. The meeting concluded with polite bows and promises of paperwork. The moment the connection severed, Claire and Ben stared at each other in stunned silence. Then a slow smile spread across Ben's face, followed by a whoop of pure joy. You did it, he yelled, pulling her into a careful, one-armed hug. You magnificent, pregnant, billionaire genius. You did it. Claire just laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated disbelief and triumph. Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time in a long time, they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of liberation. The initial euphoria of the offer was quickly replaced by the grim reality of legal logistics. Claire and Sarah were now pitted against the full force of the Drake legal team, a phalanx of merciless corporate lawyers. Ethan had recused himself, leaving the dirty work to his father's hounds. Their goal was simple: enforce the prenuptial agreement and finalize the divorce before any news of Claire's impending windfall could become a legal complication. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room downtown. Claire sat on one side of a vast mahogany table, with Sarah by her side. On the other side sat three lawyers in identical gray suits, their faces cold and impassive. Our position is clear, the lead lawyer, a man named Henderson, began without preamble. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad. Mrs. Drake, soon to be Ms. Bennett, will receive the settlement as stipulated. She will waive all future claims on Mr. Drake's assets and income, both current and future. Serenity, Sarah pushed back, her voice calm but firm. The circumstances have changed, Mr. Henderson. My client is 8 months pregnant with Mr. Drake's child. The standard child support calculations may not be adequate, given Mr. Drake's considerable resources. Henderson smirked, a reptilian twitch of his lips. Mr. Drake is prepared to be generous in that regard, provided Ms. Bennett agrees to a swift and quiet resolution. No press, no public statements. A non-disclosure agreement will, of course, be part of the final settlement. They were trying to buy her silence, to bury her and the baby under a mountain of cash and legal documents. It was disgusting. But it was the next part that truly broke her. Henderson slid a document across the table. There is one additional stipulation. Mr. Drake is ceding all parental rights. Claire stared at him, the words not registering. What did you say? He is voluntarily terminating his paternity, the lawyer said, his tone as casual as if discussing a line item in a budget. He will provide financial support, but he will have no legal rights, no custody, no visitation. In the eyes of the law, he will not be the child's father. It's cleaner this way. It allows both parties a fresh start. The clinical, corporate language terminating his paternity was a dagger to the heart. This wasn't just a divorce. This was an eradication. Ethan wasn't just leaving her. He was unfathering their child before she was even born. The baby, her little girl, would have a blank space on her birth certificate where a father's name should be. The room began to spin. Sarah put a steadying hand on her arm. Why? Claire whispered, the question directed at the empty space where Ethan should have been. Why would he do this? Henderson, for the first time, looked uncomfortable. He shuffled his papers, avoiding her gaze. As I said, it's for a clean break. It's part of a larger, strategic realignment for Mr. Drake's professional future. But Sarah, a veteran of these brutal corporate battles, understood the subtext. Her eyes narrowed. This is about the Sterling-Drake merger, isn't it? Henderson's composure cracked. He glared at her. I'm not at liberty to discuss Mr. Drake's business dealings. You don't have to, Sarah shot back, the pieces clicking into place. The Sterling board is famously conservative. Old money, old values. They're looking for stability. A messy divorce and a newborn child right at the 11th hour of the deal. That would look like a massive liability, a sign of an unstable personal life. This isn't a clean break. This is a PR move. You're liquidating his family to close a deal. The truth of it hit Claire with the force of a physical assault. The ultrasound, his tears, his hand on her belly. The name they'd picked out together, Maya. Had it all been a lie? A performance? No, she realized with a fresh wave of sickness. It hadn't been a lie then. It had just been disposable. His love for her, his excitement for their child, it had all been weighed against a business deal and found wanting. He hadn't just fallen out of love. He had been convinced by his father that his family was a threat to his ambition. He had chosen money and power over his own flesh and blood. This was the deepest betrayal of all. It wasn't just that he was leaving her. It was that he was sacrificing his own child on the altar of his career. He wasn't a man who had made a difficult choice. He was a coward who had been convinced to sell his soul. Claire stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. The three lawyers looked up, startled. Tell Ethan, she said, her voice trembling with a rage so pure it felt like ice in her veins, that I will not be signing a non-disclosure agreement. I will not be accepting his settlement. I will see him in court. She paused, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. And tell him his daughter will know her father's name. She will know he existed, and she will know that he was too small a man to love her. She turned and walked out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. The fight was no longer about money or a fair settlement. It was about dignity. It was about ensuring that the daughter Ethan was so eager to discard would be born into a world where her mother stood up to the monsters and won. Later that day, the preliminary offer from Hiroshi Capital arrived via secure email. Sarah's eyes went wide as she read the terms. Claire, do you understand what this means? She said, her voice awed. When this is finalized, you won't need Ethan Drake's money. You will be wealthier than him, wealthier than his father even. The thought was staggering, but the money, as immense as it was, felt secondary. What mattered was the validation. What mattered was the power to protect her child, the power to fight back. The Drake lawyers, sensing a shift, began to press for a quick resolution, sending increasingly desperate-sounding emails. They didn't know what was coming, but they knew something had changed. The woman who had walked into that meeting a victim had walked out a queen, and she was about to take the entire board. The day of the signing was gray and overcast, the San Francisco fog pressing against the windows of the law office like a damp shroud. It mirrored Claire's mood, a strange mixture of nervous anticipation and somber resolve. She was dressed in a simple, elegant, navy blue maternity dress, a stark contrast to the power suits of the lawyers and bankers assembled in the room. Her pregnancy was not something to be hidden. It was her armor, a visible testament to what she was fighting for. Ben was there, a solid, reassuring presence by her side. Kaito Tanaka and his team from Hiroshi Capital were on a large screen, their faces beaming in from Tokyo. The room was tense with the electric hum of a massive transaction about to take place. $2 billion was about to move, all because of an idea she'd had in a cluttered room with her best friend years ago. The documents were spread across the table, a forest of paper representing her future. Her lawyer, Sarah, walked her through the key clauses one last time, her voice a low, steady murmur. Claire barely heard the words. Her mind was on the other legal document she had refused to sign, the divorce papers that sought to erase her daughter from existence. Claire? Sarah's voice gently pulled her back to the present. It's time. A lawyer slid the final signature page in front of her. It was a simple document, just a few lines on a page, but it held the weight of a world reborn. She picked up the heavy, expensive fountain pen. As her fingers wrapped around it, she thought of Ethan. She pictured him in his own boardroom, confident and ruthless, signing deals that built his empire. He had used a pen just like this to sign away their marriage, to sever their family. Now it was her turn. Her hand was steady as she signed her name. Claire Bennett, not Drake. She was reclaiming the name she was born with, the name of the woman who had created Ether, the name her daughter would carry. The moment the ink dried, the room erupted. The bankers on the screen clapped, and Tanaka bowed deeply. "Congratulations, Bennett-san. We are embarking on a great journey together." Ben squeezed her shoulder, his eyes shining with pride. "You did it, Claire." Her phone buzzed. It was a news alert from Bloomberg. Hiroshi Capital acquires obscure AI startup Ether in shocking 2B deal, tapping founder Claire Bennett as CEO. The story was out. The world knew. The news hit the Drake Industries tower like a seismic shockwave. An assistant burst into Ethan's office, holding a tablet with the Bloomberg article displayed. "Mr. Drake, you need to see this." Ethan glanced at the headline, his brow furrowed in confusion. Claire Bennett? Ether? He vaguely remembered her talking about some little project. But $2 billion? It was a typo. It had to be. He snatched the tablet and read the article. Then he read it again. The words swam before his eyes. The woman the article described, a reclusive genius, a visionary architect of next-generation AI, was not the woman he had just discarded. Or rather, he had been so blinded by his own ambition, he had never truly seen her at all. His phone began to ring, the caller ID flashing Arthur Drake. He answered with a sense of dread. "What is the meaning of this, Ethan?" His father's voice roared, dispensing with any greeting. "Is this a joke? $2 billion? Your pregnant, soon-to-be ex-wife just signed a $2 billion deal?" I didn't know, Father," Ethan stammered, his mind struggling to process the cataclysmic shift in his reality. "You didn't know?" Arthur's voice dripped with contempt. "You lived with the woman. You told me her little company was a hobby. You assured me she was irrelevant, a loose end to be tied up. Instead, she's on the front page of every financial paper in the world. The Sterling board is calling an emergency meeting. They're spooked. This makes you look like the biggest fool in America." The line went dead. Ethan sank into his leather chair, the tablet slipping from his nerveless fingers. The implications crashed down on him. The merger, his life's work, the deal for which he had sacrificed his family, was now in jeopardy. And it was all because he had fundamentally, catastrophically, underestimated the woman he'd married. He thought of her face in the penthouse, shattered and betrayed. "You'll regret this," she had said. He had dismissed it as the empty threat of a scorned woman. He hadn't understood that it wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. He had thrown her away. And in doing so, he had thrown away everything. The woman he once loved, his unborn child, and now, potentially, the empire he had sold his soul to protect. The penthouse, which had once felt like the top of the world, now felt like a very cold, very empty prison, and he was its only inmate. The fallout was swift and brutal. The story of Claire Bennett, the pregnant, discarded wife who became a tech billionaire overnight, was irresistible. It was a story of betrayal, resilience, and epic reversal, and the media devoured it. Tech blogs, financial news, even mainstream talk shows. Everyone wanted a piece of the narrative. Claire, fiercely protective of her privacy and her unborn child, refused all interviews, releasing only a brief, dignified statement through her new company's PR firm. Her silence only fueled the mystique. For Ethan, there was nowhere to hide. His father's prediction had been horrifyingly accurate. The Sterling-Drake merger, already fragile, crumbled under the weight of the scandal. The conservative Sterling board didn't see a brilliant deal-maker. They saw a man who had been blindsided by his own wife, a man whose personal judgment was, at best, catastrophic. He had cast Claire aside to appear stable and unencumbered, and in doing so, had unleashed a storm that painted him as a reckless, unstable fool. The deal was officially called off less than a week after Claire's signing. The call from his father was the final nail in his coffin. You're finished at Drake Industries, Arthur said, his voice devoid of any paternal warmth. You've become a liability, a laughingstock. Clean out your desk. I'll have security escort you out. He had lost everything. His deal, his job, his father's respect, his wife, his child. The empire he had sacrificed his family for had cast him out. Broken and desperate, he found himself driving aimlessly, his feet leading him not to one of his expensive downtown haunts, but to the quiet, tree-lined street in Palo Alto he'd found on a desperate, frantic search. He parked across the street from Ben Carter's apartment building, the place where his entire world had been dismantled and rebuilt without him. He saw her then. Claire was walking out of the building with Ben, her belly a perfect, proud sphere under her coat. She was laughing at something Ben said, her face alight with a genuine joy he hadn't seen in years. It was a joy he had systematically suffocated with his ambition and neglect. She looked radiant, powerful, and utterly, completely out of his reach. He didn't know what he was hoping for. Forgiveness? A second chance? He just knew he had to talk to her, to try and explain the inexplicable. He got out of the car and walked toward them, his steps heavy with the weight of his regret. "Claire," he called out. She stopped, her laughter dying on her lips. She turned and her face, once so full of love for him, became a mask of cool, distant composure. Ben stepped slightly in front of her, a protective shield. "Ethan," she said, her voice flat and even. "What are you doing here?" I had to see you," he began, his voice cracking. "Claire, I am so sorry. I made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake." "A mistake," she repeated, her eyebrow arching with a bitter irony. "You call liquidating your family a mistake? You tried to erase your own daughter, Ethan. That's not a mistake. That's a character statement." "It was my father," he pleaded, the excuse sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "He pressured me. He said the merger. I was weak. I was a coward. I know that now." He took a step closer, his eyes begging for a crumb of the compassion she used to give so freely. "Please, Claire, let me be a part of her life. Our daughter's life. I don't care about the money. I'll sign anything. I want to be her father." It was the ultimate desperate reversal. The man who had tried to legally sever his paternity was now begging to be let back in. Claire looked at him, and for a moment he saw a flicker of the old Claire, the woman who had loved him, the woman who could be hurt. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the calm, unshakable strength of a woman who knew her own worth. "You had your chance to be her father, Ethan," she said, her voice quiet but devastatingly final. "You had that chance every day for 8 months. You had it when you held my hand at the ultrasound. You had it when you felt her kick for the first time. And you had it when you handed me those divorce papers and offered to terminate your paternity for a clean break." She took a deep, steadying breath. "You don't get to be her father only when it's convenient. You don't get to be her father now that your other better options have disappeared. She deserves more than that. She deserves more than a coward." She held his gaze, her eyes clear and free of hatred. There was only a profound, unshakable finality. "Goodbye, Ethan." She turned and, without looking back, she and Ben walked down the street, leaving him standing alone on the sidewalk. He watched until she was out of sight, a ghost of a life he had willingly, foolishly destroyed. The reckoning had come, not with fire and fury, but with the quiet, dignified closing of a door he could never reopen. 3 months later, the world was painted in the warm, golden hues of a California spring. In a sun-drenched house in Sausalito, overlooking the gentle waves of the bay, a new life had begun. Claire Bennett held her daughter Maya in her arms, rocking her gently. The baby was perfect, a tiny, exquisite creature with a full head of dark hair and her mother's curious, intelligent eyes. The chaos of the past few months had settled into a new, joyful rhythm. The company, officially named Ether AI, was thriving under her leadership. She had built a brilliant, loyal team, many of whom were women she had mentored in the past. They worked out of a sleek new office in San Francisco, but Claire ran the company mostly from her home office, a beautiful room with a view of the Golden Gate Bridge, a bassinet always by her side. She was a CEO, yes, but she was a mother first. The two roles were not in conflict. They were intertwined, each one making her better at the other. Ben was a constant, loving presence in their lives. He was Ether's chief technology officer, her partner in business as he had always been her partner in spirit. But more than that, he was Uncle Ben, the one who could make Maya giggle with a single silly face, the one who showed up with coffee and bagels after a sleepless night. Their friendship was the solid ground beneath her feet, a deep, abiding love that was slowly, naturally blossoming into something more. They weren't rushing it. For now, the quiet joy of building their company and their little family was more than enough. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It was addressed in Ethan's familiar, elegant script. Her first instinct was to throw it away, unopened. But curiosity, and perhaps the last lingering ghost of the love she once felt, made her pause. She sat on her porch, with Maya sleeping soundly in her carrier, and opened it. It wasn't a plea for reconciliation. It wasn't an excuse. It was simply an apology, handwritten and painfully honest. He wrote of his weakness, his arrogance, and the profound, soul-crushing regret that was now his constant companion. He wrote that he understood her decision and respected it. He didn't ask for a place in Maya's life, only that one day when she was old enough, Claire would tell her that she was the product of a love that had once been real, before his fear and ambition had destroyed it. He had enclosed a single photo, the 3D ultrasound picture, the one he had cried over, the last remnant of the man he might have been. He had lost everything, and in the wreckage, seemed to have finally found a sliver of his humanity. Claire read the letter, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness for him, but of closure for herself. She could finally let go of the anger, the bitterness, the pain. He was a chapter of her life that was now truly, completely over. She folded the letter and put it away in a box of keepsakes, along with the ultrasound photo. Maya would know the truth one day, but she would also know the more important truth, that she was loved fiercely and unconditionally by her mother, by her Uncle Ben, and by the found family they had built around them. Later that day, Claire was on a video call with the Etherboard, including Kaito Tanaka. She was bouncing a slightly fussy Maya on her lap while discussing Q3 projections. No one on the board batted an eye. They had invested in Claire Bennett, the whole person, the brilliant architect, the savvy CEO, and the devoted mother. As the call ended, she looked from the screen full of respectful colleagues to the beautiful bay stretching out before her, and finally down at the precious daughter in her arms. She had been through the fire, stripped of everything she thought defined her, and in the ashes, she had found her true strength, her true purpose, her true wealth. This was her empire, built not of glass and steel, but of love, resilience, and a future she had coded herself. And it was just the beginning. Claire ended the video call and kissed the top of Maya's head, inhaling the sweet, milky scent of her daughter. The setting sun cast a golden glow across the water, painting the sky in shades of hope and promise. She hadn't just survived, she had rewritten her entire operating system. The pain had been a crucible, burning away the non-essential, leaving behind a stronger, purer version of herself. She had learned that true power wasn't about the name you married into or the deals you closed, but the world you built for yourself and for those you love. Her greatest creation wasn't a multi-billion-dollar AI. It was this quiet, beautiful moment of peace. This story is a testament to the incredible strength within us all. If you were moved by Claire's journey of resilience and redemption, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own power, and subscribe for more stories of triumph against the odds.